It was the spring of 1944, and the dense forests of northern Italy whispered with the echoes of war. American soldiers, weary from months of relentless campaigns, trudged through mud-slicked trails beneath a canopy that barely filtered the morning sun. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint metallic tang of spent gunpowder from battles fought days before. Each step carried the weight of anticipation, the knowledge that the front lines were ever shifting, and that the enemy could be lurking anywhere. As the soldiers advanced, the ground beneath their boots betrayed faint signs of unnatural disturbance, slightly raised soil, the subtle outline of wooden planks hidden beneath moss. There was a tension in the squad, a silent agreement that something waited just beyond sight. The distant clatter of artillery mixed with the occasional sharp whistle of an incoming shell, reminding them that even here, far from the front, the war's presence was inescapable. Then, without warning, one of the younger soldiers tripped over what seemed like a simple route. But as he brushed away the dirt, the cold steel edge of a hatch emerged. Hearts raced. The captain motioned for caution, but curiosity surged. The hatch was small, unassuming, almost invisible if not for the soldiers' careful observation. As the squad pried it open, a dark void yawned beneath them, carrying the smell of damp stone and centuries of secrecy. Light from the outside fell. It was the spring of 1944, and northern Italy had become a mosaic of hope and despair, a place where the whispers of war intertwined with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. The forests, dense and unyielding, stretched endlessly, their towering trees shrouded in mist that clung to every branch like a memory of past battles. American soldiers moved cautiously along the narrow, mud-laden trails, each step an exercise in balance, each footfall disturbing the soft earth and sending up a thin cloud of damp scent into the cool morning air. Their boots sank slightly into the saturated soil, leaving prints that would soon be erased by the constant drizzle that seemed to linger over the region. Rain had fallen the night before, and puddles reflected the faint glow of sunlight struggling to pierce the canopy above, scattering light in pale, fleeting patterns across their path. The men were silent for stretches, a silence heavier than the forest itself. It was not the absence of sound, but a careful tuning to the environment, the snap of a twig, the distant roar of artillery, the faint echo of rolling tanks far beyond the hills. All were signals that could not be ignored. They carried with them months of fatigue, the kind that stiffens muscles and sharpens the edge of every sound and shadow. Their faces, smeared with mud and sweat, bore the markings of relentless campaigns, hollow cheeks, sunburned skin, eyes that had witnessed the fire and ruin of towns long abandoned. And yet the same eyes glimmered with alertness born not of fear alone, but of the shared commitment to each other and the mission. As they advanced, small details in the landscape began to emerge, subtle distortions in the forest floor that hinted at something hidden beneath. A section of earth slightly raised above the natural slope, a faint outline of timber nearly invisible under moss and ferns. The subtle difference between a normal forest trail and one carefully disguised. The soldiers recognized the signs immediately. Years of training and instinct told them that nothing here was accidental. Each man scanned the terrain, rifles slung but ready, eyes narrowing to catch the slightest movement, the faintest glint of steel under the foliage. The tension was palpable, a current running through the squad that made every breath seem louder than it should have been. In the distance, the valley below seemed to breathe under a haze of mist, the sounds of distant battle merging with the forest's natural rhythm. Artillery fire echoed intermittently, not close enough to strike, but close enough to remind them that the enemy was never far, never idle. Birds fluttered through the branches, startled by the occasional crack of distant gunfire, as though nature itself was wary of the human conflict creeping through its green corridors. The soldiers' minds were alive with calculation and caution, each one aware that a misstep could be fatal, yet also aware that discovery could bring unprecedented advantage. It was Private Reynolds who first noticed it, a subtle protrusion beneath a blanket of leaves, a ridge that did not belong, the cold suggestion of something man-made buried beneath the soil. Kneeling, he brushed the moss aside, and the cold edge of a metal hatch appeared, dull but unmistakable against the brown and green of the forest floor. Hearts raced. The captain gestured for stillness, signaling that any noise could alert the enemy, but also that the moment required careful observation. The hatch, small and nondescript, seemed almost intentionally hidden, a silent testament to German ingenuity and secrecy. Its presence beneath centuries of soil and detritus transformed the familiar forest into a place of suspense and portent. The soldiers moved as one, trained hands lifting the hatch slowly, the sound of metal on metal cutting through the forest's natural hum. A dark void yawned before them, a sudden chasm into silence, the air heavy with the musty scent of damp stone and confinement. The light from the spring morning fell into the opening, revealing contours and shadows that suggested not just a hole, but a deliberately constructed subterranean space. The smell was tangible, earthy, cold, untouched by sunlight, carrying the faint scent of oil, metal, and secrecy. The soldiers exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, others tight-lipped, understanding instinctively that what lay before them was no ordinary storage. One by one they descended carefully, boots echoing softly against stone steps that seemed to have been hewn decades before. The bunker stretched ahead, walls lined with crates, stacks of documents, and the unmistakable outlines of weaponry meticulously arranged. Each discovery elicited a new wave of shock and curiosity. Maps detailing fortifications, troop movements, and supply lines were piled neatly, some annotated with careful German handwriting. Manuals and encrypted communication guides sat beside them, waiting for eyes capable of deciphering their meaning. The men understood, even in this early moment, the gravity of their find, a secret chamber designed to shape strategy, a place where the enemy's plans were stored with near religious care. Every footstep revealed more a row of rifles, shiny and oiled, ready for deployment, boxes marked with ominous yet precise symbols, papers that hinted at offensives yet to be executed, ambushes meticulously planned, towns identified as strategic points of control. Private Reynolds ran a gloved hand along the edge of a map, tracing the paths marked for troop movements, absorbing the implications with growing awareness. The room was silent save for their careful movements and the occasional intake of breath. It was as if the bunker itself held its breath, aware that it had been discovered but offering no resistance, no warning, only the raw truth of the enemy's intentions. Outside, the forest continued its slow, indifferent rhythm. Birds resumed cautious chirping. Sunlight fell in shifting patterns through the trees, catching briefly on the soldiers' helmets, reflecting off muddy boots. Yet inside the bunker, time felt suspended. Each man was acutely conscious that the war beyond these walls could be changed, that strategies could shift, that lives might be spared or lost depending on how this intelligence was used. There was exhilaration, yes, but also an almost suffocating weight of responsibility. They were no longer merely soldiers moving through enemy territory. They had become witnesses and custodians of the enemy's blueprint, participants in a moment that could redirect history. As the soldiers catalogued their finds, a strange reverence settled over the group. This hidden space, so meticulously concealed beneath the forest floor, represented both the ingenuity of the enemy and the vulnerability of their designs. Each crate opened, each map unrolled, was a revelation: supply routes, codes, detailed reports on Allied positions, defensive strategies. The cumulative intelligence of an entire campaign laid bare. The men moved deliberately, carefully photographing and documenting, aware that any misstep could result in loss, but also understanding the unprecedented advantage they now held. The bunker seemed endless. Passageways led to smaller compartments, each containing elements of war carefully stored: spare uniforms, rations, ammunition, mechanical parts, and even personal notes from officers that humanized the enemy without diminishing their threat. It was a sobering realization: these were real men, meticulous in their planning, capable of both strategy and cruelty, and yet vulnerable in the concealment of their plans. The soldiers felt an odd kinship with those who had constructed the bunker, not in ideology, but in the recognition of human foresight, ingenuity, and fear. By mid-morning, the squad had secured the bunker entrance and relayed word to their superiors. Field commanders understood immediately the significance of the find. Reports were sent up the chain of command, photographs taken, and every document carefully preserved for analysis. Even as the soldiers exited the bunker, the forest seemed altered. No longer simply a backdrop to battle, but a witness to a secret that had changed the stakes of the war in this region. The discovery would ripple through intelligence channels rapidly. Plans adjusted, ambushes avoided, reinforcements redirected. The hidden bunker had shifted the balance in a theater of war that was fluid and unforgiving. For the men who had first pried open the hatch, the memory of that spring morning would remain indelible: the cold metal beneath their hands, the musty air of the underground, the glint of sunlight on maps and crates, and the profound sense that in the quiet, secret spaces of the earth, history was being held, waiting for those brave enough to uncover it. Even as the war continued beyond these forests, the knowledge gained within the bunker became a silent partner in every maneuver that followed. And while artillery roared and soldiers advanced across hills and valleys, a small team of Americans had glimpsed the machinery of conflict in its most intimate form, realizing that victory was not just about courage and firepower, but about insight, timing, and the unexpected revelations hidden in the most unassuming. The interior of the bunker was unlike anything the soldiers had encountered in months of campaigning. The air was thick with dust and the unmistakable scent of damp stone, a combination of earth and metal that clung to their clothes and skin. Every breath carried with it the knowledge that this place had remained untouched for weeks, perhaps months, and the silence within was so profound that even the smallest movement echoed sharply against the cold walls. As the men stepped carefully into the chamber, their boots producing faint reverberations, they were struck by the sheer organization of the space. This was no crude hideout hastily constructed. It was deliberate, methodical, and designed with the precision of military discipline. Crates were stacked neatly along the walls, their wooden surfaces marked with German insignias and carefully scrawled labels indicating contents. Some crates were heavy, filled with munitions and rifles, while others contained more enigmatic items, documents, maps and manuals, each hinting at the broader machinery of war that had orchestrated the enemy's campaigns across Italy. Private Daniels approached a large stack of maps. The corners yellowed but intact, and ran his fingers along the faded lines and annotations. Each marking told a story. Troop positions, defensive fortifications, supply routes. A level of detail that both impressed and unnerved him. The soldiers realized immediately that this was more than a storage site. It was a repository of intelligence, a carefully curated collection of the enemy's knowledge. As they moved through the bunker, crates of weapons revealed the scale of preparedness, rows of rifles, machine pistols and grenades, all meticulously maintained. Some crates contained ammunition sealed in oilcloth, their odor sharp and metallic, reminding the men of the deadly purpose of the items before them. Others held tools and mechanical parts, indicating a level of readiness for sustained operations that extended far beyond what they had anticipated in these forests. Each discovery was accompanied by a shared sense of awe and urgency. Captain Harris gestured for the men to proceed slowly, emphasizing care over haste. One wrong move could damage the fragile documents or, worse, trigger a misjudged weight that might cause injury. Yet the soldiers were acutely aware that time was of the essence. Intelligence this significant could not remain hidden for long. As they pried open crates, they found items that illustrated the meticulous planning of the enemy, tactical manuals detailing ambush strategies, encrypted communication instructions, and blueprints of fortifications yet to be completed. There were notebooks with handwriting precise and deliberate, pages filled with schedules, supply inventories, and coded messages, some marked with dates and coordinates that corresponded to locations the soldiers had already passed during the campaign. The bunker was essentially a blueprint of enemy strategy, and the men realized that this single discovery could alter the conduct of the war in northern Italy. The soldiers moved deeper into the space, their senses heightened with each step. Private Reynolds paused at a crate labeled Nachrichten, German for communications, and carefully lifted its lid. Inside were documents detailing signal codes and messaging procedures, the kind that could give the Americans an unparalleled advantage if deciphered quickly. Nearby, another crate contained rifles with bayonets attached, stacked neatly, ready for immediate use. The juxtaposition of strategy and weaponry in such close proximity was sobering. The soldiers could see, almost tangibly, the dual nature of warfare. Planning and violence intertwined in ways both precise and unforgiving. A small side chamber revealed further surprises. Piled high were personal notes and letters written by German officers, many referencing operations that the soldiers had encountered only in fragments during reconnaissance. These notes humanized the enemy without diminishing the threat. The handwriting was neat, almost careful, reflecting pride in meticulous record-keeping. Some letters contained observations about local terrain, the movement of Allied forces, or logistical challenges that had been overcome. In this quiet, dimly lit space, the soldiers felt the weight of history pressing in around them. Here were the calculations, the fears, and the ambitions of men they had been fighting against, preserved in ink and paper, immune to the chaos of the battlefield above. As they catalogued the items, the soldiers became acutely aware of the scale of what they had uncovered. Crates of grenades and submachine guns lined one corridor, while another revealed detailed maps that extended well beyond the immediate region. suggesting plans for operations across Italy and potentially into neighboring territories. Every new discovery carried the potential to save lives or to prevent disaster. The men paused frequently to examine documents, to compare them against their own maps, and to discuss quietly what each piece of intelligence might mean in the broader context of the campaign. The bunker was teaching them, revealing the depth of enemy planning, and offering a glimpse into the meticulous care that had gone into preparing for engagements they had previously only experienced as chaos. The realization of what lay before them began to sink in. The soldiers were in possession of information that could reshape entire battles. Crates were carefully labeled and marked for transportation. Photographs were taken of maps and documents, and the men coordinated to ensure nothing was disturbed or lost. Captain Harris emphasized that every detail mattered. The enemy's plans were fragile in the sense that a single misinterpretation could lead to wasted opportunities or dangerous exposure. Yet the bunker, with its orderly chaos, was a gift, a moment of clarity amid the fog of war. The soldiers understood instinctively that this find was rare, almost unprecedented in its significance, and that it could not be underestimated. Hours passed as the soldiers worked systematically through the underground chambers. They noted supply inventories that revealed German priorities, ranging from food and medical supplies to spare parts for vehicles and artillery. Maps were cross-referenced against recent reconnaissance reports, allowing them to identify likely troop movements and defensive strategies. Some documents even included plans for operations that had yet to be executed, giving American commanders the possibility of preemptive maneuvers. In these quiet hours, the men's fatigue faded into focus. They moved with purpose, cataloging every detail and absorbing the magnitude of the discovery. The bunker was no longer simply a hidden space. It had become a command center in miniature, a repository of strategic knowledge that could be leveraged to save lives and shift momentum in the campaign. By late afternoon, the soldiers had secured the main chambers, with crates organized for transport and documents carefully documented. They paused for a brief moment to consider the enormity of their find, the dim light of the underground chamber casting shadows across walls lined with intelligence and weaponry. The hum of the forest outside reminded them that the world continued beyond these walls, but within the bunker, time seemed suspended. Here, in the quiet and orderly chaos, they held in their hands the tools to understand and potentially rewrite the unfolding battles. The responsibility was immense, yet the men carried it with a mix of solemnity and awe, aware that history had, for a fleeting moment, passed through their grasp. In the final corners of the bunker, the soldiers discovered additional notes and maps, many annotated with precise times, locations, and coded instructions. One stack detailed supply routes that had previously confounded Allied intelligence officers, while another revealed the schedule of troop rotations and rotations of armored units in areas the Americans had been preparing to engage. The soldiers moved carefully, knowing that each scrap of paper, each photograph of a map, could be a key to unlock. The realization of the bunker's contents did not strike the soldiers all at once. It began as a whisper in the back of their minds, a sense of weight pressing against the edges of awareness as they moved from crate to crate, from map to map. The gravity of what they had uncovered slowly settled in, a quiet force that made the air seem heavier, almost sacred. Faces that had been hardened by months of relentless campaigning, faces etched with dirt, sweat, and exhaustion. softened under the dim light of the underground chamber. Eyes that had scanned forests and hills for ambushes and enemy movements now lingered over documents and maps, reading details that could shape the lives of thousands, including their own comrades. Some soldiers sank to their knees, overwhelmed by the responsibility of what they held, a knowledge that could alter the course of engagements, prevent bloodshed, or lead to victories that had once seemed uncertain. Private Reynolds, who had discovered the initial hatch, stared at a map annotated with troop rotations and supply schedules. The precision was staggering. Each line, each symbol, each date had been crafted with care, a testament to discipline and foresight. The young soldier could feel the weight of it, a strange mixture of awe and apprehension. He looked at the others, noticing similar expressions mirrored across the room, the quiet tremor of excitement tempered by the sobering recognition of the human cost involved. They were holding more than documents. They were holding lives, the power to influence the decisions of commanders who would rely on this intelligence to make choices that could mean survival or death for men on both sides. The bunker, though silent, seemed to amplify every emotion. The echo of boots on stone, the soft rustle of paper, even the faint drip of water from the ceiling created a cadence that underscored the weight of the moment. In the dim light, shadows stretched across the walls, reflecting the lines of maps and crates like ghostly reminders of what the enemy had hidden so carefully. The soldiers moved deliberately, aware that every gesture mattered, that the smallest mishandling could damage documents that contained secrets vital to the Allied campaign. Yet amidst the caution, there was also a shared exhilaration. For once, the chaos of war had yielded to clarity, revealing an opportunity to anticipate, to prepare, and to act with knowledge that had been previously unattainable. Private Daniels paused by a crate filled with communications manuals, running his fingers along the neat lines of German script. He imagined the officers who had written them, the hours they had spent encoding messages and planning strategies, and he felt a mixture of respect and resolve. There was something deeply human in this. The enemy had been meticulous, organized, and clever, yet vulnerable in their reliance on documentation. The soldiers understood that they now had a glimpse into that vulnerability, and with it, a responsibility that was almost sacred. They whispered among themselves, discussing coordinates and annotations in low tones, aware that the information was more than tactical. It was transformative. Time seemed suspended within the bunker. Minutes stretched into hours as the men catalogued crates, photographed documents, and compared maps against their own intelligence. In the quiet, the weight of the moment pressed in on each soldier differently. Some felt awe at the scale of the discovery. Others were overwhelmed by the ethical implications, the knowledge of potential death and survival resting in their hands. Captain Harris moved among them, guiding the cataloging process while allowing the men moments to absorb what they were seeing. He understood that this was not just an operational task, but an emotional crucible, a rare moment where the war's chaos had yielded a form of order. And with that order, a profound responsibility. As the soldiers worked, the dim light of the bunker seemed to take on a new character. Shadows danced across maps annotated with troop movements, rifles gleamed under the weak bulbs, and crates of grenades reflected the faint light like silent sentinels. The room was alive with history, yet there was no sound of battle, no immediate threat, only the echo of human effort, careful, deliberate, purposeful. The soldiers, Private Reynolds leaned against a wall, exhausted yet alert, staring at a collection of maps that detailed fortifications along the northern Italian terrain. The precision and foresight of the German planning were almost intimidating, but instead of fear, he felt a sense of possibility. This intelligence could allow his unit and others to maneuver with confidence, to avoid ambushes, and to strike with precision. The soldiers exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging the weight of the moment and the shared sense of responsibility. The emotional resonance of the discovery was palpable. It was not merely tactical advantage that they had found, but a profound connection to the human elements of war. Foresight, vulnerability, and the burden of choice. The men moved from one chamber to another, documenting, photographing, and carefully handling crates and maps. Each find carried emotional weight letters from German officers, notes on supply logistics, and detailed annotations about Allied movements that had previously been uncertain. The soldiers whispered in reverence, not wanting to disturb the fragile sense of order within the bunker. Their exhaustion from weeks of campaigning was replaced, momentarily, by a heightened awareness of the stakes. The emotional impact was not limited to the value of the intelligence. It extended to the recognition of their own role in shaping history. In this quiet underground chamber, they were not merely soldiers. They were custodians of information that could alter the trajectory of lives and battles alike. Captain Harris called the men together briefly, his voice low but firm. He reminded them of the importance of accuracy, of careful documentation, and of the responsibility inherent in their discovery. The soldiers nodded, internalizing not only the orders but the gravity of the moment. Each man understood that the bunker's contents were more than maps and weapons. They were instruments of influence, capable of shaping decisions and outcomes far beyond this single underground space. There was a shared solemnity, a collective understanding that the war could be redirected by the knowledge they now possessed. As they continued their work, the dim light revealed the final layers of the bunker's secrets. Maps were cross-referenced against operational reports, crates were logged and organized, and photographs were taken with meticulous care. The soldiers moved with precision, their earlier fatigue replaced by focus, driven by the understanding that every detail mattered. The emotional intensity of the moment persisted, as awe mingled with responsibility, and the men internalized the quiet power of knowledge in shaping the war. Even in silence, the bunker seemed to breathe with the history it held, reminding the soldiers of both the enemy's skill and the opportunity now resting in Allied hands. Hours later, as they prepared to leave, the soldiers paused once more, taking in the full scale of the discovery. The dimly lit chambers, lined with crates, maps, and documents, reflected the culmination of meticulous planning, human effort, and vulnerability. Each soldier carried with him the weight of understanding that their actions, their careful handling of this intelligence, could directly influence lives, decisions, and the course of campaigns. In the quiet, reverent atmosphere of the bunker, they had glimpsed not only the enemy's strategy, but the broader human dimension of war, the foresight, the diligence, and the fragile balance between life and death. As they ascended the steps to daylight, the forest outside seemed transformed. The sunlight filtering through the trees, the distant hum of artillery, and the whisper of wind through the leaves all seemed imbued with new significance. The soldiers had moved through a space that was both temporal and timeless, where human effort and military precision were preserved in stone and wood. They understood that the emotional impact of the bunker's discovery would remain with them long after the maps and crates had been transported to command. They had been witnesses to a hidden dimension of the war, a place where strategy, intelligence, and human responsibility converged, leaving an indelible mark on their perception of conflict. Even as they walked back into the forest trails, carrying carefully documented maps and photographs, the emotional resonance lingered. They had entered a silent chamber of human effort and emerged with a profound awareness of the responsibilities that knowledge carries. The bunker had revealed both the ingenuity of the enemy and the weight of the power they now held. Every crate, every document, every annotation was a reminder that victory was not only a matter of force, but of understanding, foresight, and the ethical stewardship of intelligence. In that quiet underground space, the soldiers had confronted the emotional core of warfare. The knowledge that insight could save lives, alter strategies, and shape history itself.